Under every doorway, they buried a dog made of clay. These figurines came from the Assyrian Empire, the dominant power of Mesopotamia in the first millennium BCE, long before Rome was more than a village. The practice is best documented at Nineveh, the empire's capital, in the 7th century BCE. Nineveh reached its height under King Ashurbanipal, who ruled from a palace lined wall to wall with carved stone reliefs, endlessly reminding visitors how great he was. And whatever protection those clay dogs offered clearly wasn't reserved for kings. They went under thresholds in modest mud brick homes just as often as beneath towering palace gates. They were buried in careful sets, usually 5 to a doorway, sometimes in pairs, arranged in a tidy row like a silent little patrol underfoot. Each one was small, roughly shaped by hand, sometimes painted and often given its own name, scratched into the clay before it went into the ground. British and Iraqi excavators found them still lying exactly where Assyrian hands had placed them millennia earlier, when they broke open Nineveh's ruins in the 19th century. A real dog can guard a door. It barks, it bites, it wakes the house. These could do none of that. They were only fired clay, and somehow that was the point. But no incantation is worth reciting without something worth fearing, and the Assyrians were very specific about what that was. Their incantation texts give her a name: Lamashtu, a demoness blamed for stealing infants from the cradle and mothers in the act of giving birth. The same texts describe her riding a donkey, a serpent gripped in each hand, suckling a pig at her breast, and bringing fever, nightmare, and the sudden death of a sleeping child. She was never imagined smashing through walls. Mesopotamian belief held that she and her kind came in through the gaps, the door, the window, wherever a house let its guard down. Tablets like this one spell out exactly how to stop her. The incantations, the amulets, positioned at those same weak points. To drive her off, they invoked something almost as terrifying. Pazuzu was a demon god feared in his own right, but he was said to hate Lamashtu enough to chase her from a house. She was never alone in the dark. Below her, tradition peopled the night with lesser demons of plague, of chills, of sudden collapse, each one carved distinct, scorpion-headed, bird-winged, fanged. All of them were imagined the same way: patient, opportunistic, waiting at the threshold for the one house careless enough to leave itself unguarded. That was the danger an ordinary Assyrian family believed it lived with every night. And it's exactly why, beneath their floor, they buried something meant to fight back. That task fell to the Asipu, Assyria's specialist in exorcism, the man you called when a demon got personal. He didn't pick up a weapon. He picked up mud, working it wet between his hands until it took the crude shape of a dog. Cuneiform ritual tablets are oddly precise about what came next. 5 of these dogs, each painted a different color, before a single one went near the ground. Then, while the clay was still soft, he cut a name into its flank. Because in Mesopotamian magic, a name wasn't a label, it was a weapon built into the body. Some of those names survive word for word on the tablets. Loud is his bark, catcher of the enemy. Others read sterner still, expeller of the evil one, and scholars studying these sets believe each dog was assigned its own distinct duty, a small division of labor against the dark. Before a single figure touched the earth, the priest recited an incantation over them, speaking the demon's defeat as though saying it made it true. By most readings of that text, the words did more than bless the clay. They commanded it, ordering the dogs to seize any intruder outright and drive it back the way it came. Only then, one by one, were they carried to the threshold and sealed into the ground beneath it. That search led Layard to Kyanjik in 1845, a mound so vast the locals had stopped asking what was under it. He was betting it was Nineveh itself. He didn't work alone. His foreman was Hormuzd Rassam, an Iraqi Christian who spoke the local dialects and knew the terrain better than any European ever would, and who would later run the dig himself. The crews tunneled straight through collapsed mud brick palaces, following fallen walls down through centuries of silt toward the one place they now knew to look: the doorways. And at those thresholds, trowels kept striking something small and hard, still sitting exactly where it had been set down millennia before. Clay dogs, buried under the doorway floors, undisturbed for over 2,000 years, in the very pits the incantation tablets had described down to the position. Some turned up next to inscribed tablets naming the ritual outright for the first time. Scholars could hold the object and the text that explained it in the same two hands. Between 1845 and the early 1850, the tally kept growing. Dozens of these figurines pulled from gateways scattered right across the site. For the scholars piecing it together, that closed the gap entirely. What Cuneiform had only described, the ground had now confirmed had actually happened. What had been read for years as myth was suddenly evidence of practice proof that real people had knelt at these thresholds and buried guardians against whatever they believed waited in the dark. So the dogs were never just charms tossed into the dirt for luck. Scholars now read them as one piece of an organized system of Mesopotamian medicine magic, closer to a pharmacy than a superstition. The men who wrote the incantations pressed into these tablets were called Asipu specialists, somewhere between priest and physician, and their spells were treatment, not theater. One of the demons that system was built to repel had a name, Pazuzu, carved for centuries to drive off the child-killing Lamashtu. In 1973, he came back as the demon of the Exorcist. That wasn't an accident. The novel's author had stood before real Pazuzu figurines in museum collections, and he built the film's Iraqi excavation and the statue itself directly from what he saw. But strip away Nineveh entirely, and the same instinct keeps surfacing anyway. Cultures with no contact, no shared texts, all guarding the same 6 feet of wood and stone, the doorway. In Jewish practice, a mezuzah fixed to the doorpost still carries scripture meant to sanctify the threshold, inscribed protection, exactly where the clay dogs once stood buried. Nail a horseshoe above a European door, and by folk tradition never formally recorded, only handed down, you're doing the same job, barring whatever's outside from getting in. Carve a monster onto a cathedral instead, and you get a gargoyle Gothic builders arming sacred ground with a guardian grotesque enough to scare evil off before it arrives. None of these 4 traditions descend from one another. No line runs from Nineveh to a Gothic rooftop, and yet clay dog, mezuzah, horseshoe and gargoyle are all answering the same fear, which is the real case for the clay dogs of Nineveh, not relics of primitive fear, but a precise, working system, one whose imagery still walks straight into our monsters today. If this was worth your time, subscribe. There is another story like it waiting on the channel.